Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution. The revolution.
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, John Corcoran.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here, the host of this show. And every week, I get to talk to smart CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs of all kinds of companies, ranging from YPO to EO, Netflix, Kinko's, Activision Blizzard, LendingTree, OpenTable, and many more. I'm also the co-founder of Rise 25, where we help to connect B2B business owners to their ideal prospects. And this is part of our Top Agency Leader series, where we dive into some of the issues that are affecting this vibrant area of the economy, agencies, digital agencies in particular, and some of the things that they're doing to help companies to evolve and survive in this new digital world that we're living in. And a couple of quick shout outs. First, to Laura Boyer of Black Bean Marketing. Go to blackbeanmarketing.com. She told me that, hey, you got to reach out to Joe and have him on the show. And so that's why I did it. And also a thank you to Carl Smith of Bureau of Digital, who I've thanked many times on this show, because he has an amazing community called Bureau of Digital, which I participate in. Joe does as well. So my guest is Joe Rinaldi. He's a people connector, community builder, sales strategist. He helps client services agencies, internal teams and consultants, and enterprise teams to level up their business development and client services practices. He's also built custom teams and engagements for enterprises that need trusted partners to create their next iOS app, build a large-scale website, or punch out priorities on their digital product roadmap. So he's a coach, consultant, also an adjunct professor at Drexel University. And I'm really excited to have him here today. And of course, this episode is brought to you by Rise 25, where we help B2B businesses to get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with done-for-you podcasts and content marketing. Go to rise25media.com or email us at support@rise25media.com if you want to learn more. All right, Joe, such a pleasure to have you here. And I wanted to dive into your story. In particular, there was a moment in time about 6 or 7 years ago. You were working at Happy Cog, which is an agency that we've had a couple of other guests. Brett Harned was one who we'll touch on again later in the show, who is also there. And you're working there, and a bunch of stuff hits the fan all at once. You've got an agency that's doing pretty well at the time, but lost a couple of big businesses. And this, by the way, is what keeps me up at night, is this kind of scenario. But you at the time were doing business development, and it's like you get drafted to the big leads. Like, all right, go to it.
Yeah.
We got a $6 or $7 million agency that's hit a crisis of epic proportions, and 20 or so people whose livelihoods are depending on you. And you, who studied leadership studies in college, I think this is so beautiful. Like, holy crap. All right. Remember all that stuff you learned in college? Everything you read in a book? Go to it. So take me back. What was that like to suddenly get drafted and have to take over at such a moment of crisis?
It was a crucible, to say the least. It was an amazing experience, but it was also, really fraught. I think part of the reason why I was a likely candidate to assume that kind of role was partly that I had the experience I had, but partly was because I think it was just perceived that I cared the most about the team and the agency outside of, leadership. I think that there was this decision that leadership wanted to kind of step back a little bit and create some space, and they needed someone to come in to kind of occupy that space. And, if for no other reason, I think part of the reason I was thrust into that role was I was the one that loved Happy Cog the most and it cared about it the most. So on top of the steep learning curve and kind of punching my way out of that situation, I think it was, playing on my heartstrings in a way that was also pretty crucial as well. So I think it was, it was kind of all in. It was a complex, intellectual exercise. It was also kind of an emotional journey to kind of go through. It was buck wild. I mean, it really was. It was fascinating and really life-changing, and like, it was just a singular moment that I think my career kind of pivots around in a lot of ways.
What was the hardest part of it? Did you have to lay anyone off? Was it trying to Because I know one of the things you did
Yeah.
was kind of have to pivot the business away from big
Yeah.
projects to smaller ones.
Yep.
Was it convincing everyone of the wisdom of that strategy?
Yeah, part of it was that it was retaining the valuable team we had. You know, you mentioned that I worked with Brett when he was at Happy Cog. I mean, there were people who sat at desks at Happy Cog who were my colleagues, who you could build an agency around each one of them overnight. Like, just some true, like, game-changing, talented people. And our business was designed to work with, you know, a small, powerful team. The biggest challenge I had, giving them a reason to stay, you know, finding a way to retain the team and adapt in the face of the challenges we had, but at the same time, not make it this, you know, morbid rescue slog. It had to be that we were reinventing this. I remember at the time, like, trying to pull from like a movie franchise that gets rebooted, like when Daniel Craig took over James Bond. Like,
yeah.
You got to take the best of the old and what the current context is and some innovative new things. And if you can mix all those things together, then you get, you know, an interesting kind of combination of the heritage of the thing plus the ambition of a new thing. And that's truly what I tried to focus on the most in my time there, was like, can we make this an optimistic, hopeful, excited new chapter, as opposed to, you know, I'm here taking care of this wounded animal instead, which was certainly a path that could have gone down at the time.
Yeah, I'm sure you studied a lot of leaders. I'd never heard of a leadership studies degree, but it sounds like fascinating. Yeah. Were there any particular leaders that you drew inspiration from?
I think the leaders I always drew from, they're a part of a philosophy called servant leadership. That's, you know, not that unknown of a concept anymore, but in, you know, 97, when I was graduating from college, 96, Greenleaf was really the only real author writing about it at the time. It hadn't taken off in kind of popular leadership culture, I don't think, to the same way. Leading from within, the you know, being a servant leader, really making sure that your version of leadership is, you know, from the context of the team, not dragging from the outside. That was always the version of leadership that spoke to me. And there's, you know, lots of people that I'd be ashamed to compare myself to them or to point them as some people that I would, you know, look at aspirationally. But that was really the goal. My goal was, like, listen as much as I can, understand as much as I can, you know, kind of root my decisions in the broader team context, and, you know, try to lose all the I's and embrace all the we's and figure out how to move the ball forward from there.
Yeah. Warren Rustand and Vern Harnish, two past guests on this podcast, have talked a lot about that, about servant leadership and how to go about it. Easier said than done, though, because there are certain things that you need to do. You can't, you know, as we were talking beforehand, you can't give up all of your authority. One of the things that you did was you tore up the handbook. And this is relevant to today, when we've got a real labor crisis right now, and people are calling it the Great Resignation. People are leaving. But that's one of the first things you did as the newly minted head of this organization. You said, we're going to work together and tear up the handbook. So talk a little bit about that approach and how you went about it.
Yeah, I mean, my goal was to try to help folks see this as an opportunity. You know, we're changing everything. Everything's, you know, on the table. We can talk about anything. We can scrutinize anything. You know, this is an opportunity that we can reconsider, you know, the blocking and tackling of how we typically do this. So one way that I tried to do that was I tried to organize us around, you know, questioning all of the core, you know, expectations in what had been our employee handbook, opening up a dialogue, you know, not forfeiting control and making it kind of an open, you know, democratic process where everybody's just voting on things willy-nilly, but really trying to, like, curate the recommendations from the team, find one or two or three or four things that would move the needle for folks and have an impact on their, you know, morale and their enthusiasm and, you know, just their motivation to be there, and then build outward from there. Like, find a few things that we can kind of, you know, stem from. And one of the, you know, I asked broad questions to kind of give folks a chance to wax philosophical about things. And one of the themes that came up again and again was this friction between what had been our, like, scheduled working hours and what people preferred. You know, there was this Actually, it wasn't like it was arduous or anything. It was like the expectation was you would be at your desk by 9 and there was like a fixed working day. And that was how you logged in and out. And folks said like, actually I'm most productive in the evening. I'm a coder. I like to do this stuff at like, 6 to 7 o'clock at night and get like a chunk of work in. Then I had other folks that said, I'd rather like have my morning and come in later. So what we arrived at was we embraced core working hours, which was, it was 10 to 2 Eastern, was a core time when everybody was online. So we had a big Philadelphia presence. We had folks kind of working throughout the country where we're all online from 10 to 2 Eastern. So we could have team meetings, we could have client meetings, we could reliably bank on each other being available then. But then we had folks that they started their day at 10 and worked late. We had folks that started the day early and ended at 2. We had folks that worked 10 to 2 and then came back online later. And it was really up to them to tailor the balance of their hours around what made sense for whatever, their lifestyle or their preference or their work habits. And I think that if nothing else, I think that people felt seen. I mean, that was as much the purpose really was for people to feel like they'd been heard, to feel like that they'd been seen. The output of changing some things was almost, academic. It was more like, if we are all co-authoring this, if we are all contributing to what the next version of this is going to be, all of our signatures are on the declaration here. We're all kind of invested. So that was truly, 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 if I'm being honest, what I was trying to do was to, kind of manufacture that investment by giving people a chance to kind of manipulate a thing, put their fingerprints on it, make it what they wanted it to be. The output hopefully would have been some optimization like that or some other like wrinkles in our process. But truly it was at its heart trying to create that core that would be, you need some entity to be within to serve and lead. You need to create this kind of structure that you can lead from within. And I felt at the time that we were fractured and frayed and we needed to kind of like coalesce around that. So that exercise, I think, was, scary for some people. Like, I got hired here. Now you're pulling the rug out of these assumptions. Like, what does that mean? So I think it was, complex, but I do think that there was a benefit to the folks that contributed who felt like they'd, maybe move the needle a little bit toward themselves in terms of like how their workday was organized.
Right. And I want to, in a moment, I want to ask about how that relates to what the work that you do with clients today and what companies are seeing today with the Great Resignation and all that kind of stuff. But in addition, another challenge that Happy Cog had was that this was one of these agencies which emerged with the emergence of the web and these big projects that would come along. And so that was really what they stuck with. And that's a risky scenario because you lose one or two projects and boom, there goes half your revenue or a quarter of your revenue for the year, which people are depending on. So that was another big challenge you had on your hands, which was moving away from that. So how did you tackle that big challenge?
Yeah, I mean, the focus in my mind was to just diversify our revenue in a way that we were not, out there whale hunting anymore, looking for massive projects and then living with the gaps in between. Things like retainers, things like services were focuses of the business that I wanted to kind of get in place, that we had more cash forecasting, bankability, reliability, and it doesn't insulate you from everything, but when you have some retained services, when you have some steady income, it prevents the needle from dropping below a certain sea level, which is incredibly valuable. So, I think the first client that we got into a multi-year retainer was David's Bridal. We had done a full redesign of their e-commerce site and had this great partnership. And I made, great effort to move them into some kind of structured, ongoing monthly retainer, maybe every 6 months, or I think it was 6 months at a time. That just gave us that amount to bank on. Like, we knew we had those checks coming in reliably and we could do great work for them. So, moving into, I think there was it was unknown. And I think there was this fear that if we became a retainer partner, we'd be woken up by a beeper at 3 o'clock in the morning because the site was down and now we're the geek squad figuring this out. And, it just took putting the right guardrails and expectations in place to get on the same page about, no, this is just a ribbon of work that we're going to work on that's a certain size and scale. Project going to flow through this work stream. Some are too big. We'll have to be separate projects. Some are going to fit in there cozily and we'll work on those. And, effect was profound. And it's one of the core things in what I kind of coach my clients into is the value of account management, of really, squeezing the orange juice out of the oranges you have and making sure that you're really focused on capturing all the value in your existing relationships. It's the easiest place to sell. It's the smartest place to sell. It has such a profound impact on your just viability to have some of that context lined up. That's one of the major themes in all of my consulting and helping agencies get better at biz dev or improve their sales process is looking at account management as one of the biggest cornerstones of your business development playbook. And it can be just as creative and just as exciting and just as interesting as new leads and new projects and new clients tend to be. You just have to, again, design it the right way.
Right. And that's the key thing, right? And it's interesting because you came from the world of business development, and there tends to be a tension, sometimes can be a tension between sales and business development and the fulfillment team. Sales and business development, sales are like, oh, it's easy. We'll create this thing. And then they sell it. And then the fulfillment team's like, well, wait a second, what do we have to do? But then you rose to the level of president, but did you experience some tension when you started to roll out those types of projects? Did some pushback? Was it the way you described it sounded like not that hard, but I also know from personal experience and from talking to others that it can be a huge challenge to make that kind of pivot.
Sure. And I think that I don't recall experiencing a lot of friction. I think that the things that reduced the friction were, one, I wasn't insisting that we hunker down into a retainer with a client that folks were frustrated with or cranky about. This was a client that we had a great relationship with. The folks that worked with that client were excited to continue working with that client. And I was like painfully transparent. Like, we need this. Like, we need a version of this. We need to start to focus on locking these things in so that we can, put this money in the bank reliably, so that we can have this, cushion that we can exist on at some point. And I think, it's not, everybody's job to worry about those things. It's not what they want to do. They want to do their job. And sometimes that kind of insight can be a burden, and it can be stressful and scary. Like, part of it was also just creating the space to talk it out. Like, if you have questions, come ask me questions. If you have concerns, tell me your concerns. Like, I get that this is different. I get that this is unknown. Similarly, we're not committing to this for 2 years. Like, I think the first version of it we signed might have been 3 months and then 6 months. So it was, we're going to take this for a test drive, and I'll have your back if this isn't what you want, and we'll figure all this out. But luckily the team was on board. We had a good client that was willing to kind of be the first attempt at this. And then, in time, they saw that they weren't a production team getting orders barked at them to knock out, somebody's to-do list. They weren't staff augmentation. They weren't, on call for website support or maintenance. Like, it's on us. If we can choke this roadmap of work with amazing things we can do, and improvements we can focus on, and interesting projects, then we choke out all the crap we don't want to do. Like, we force all that stuff off the map. So we don't have to do that work. It's a matter of just, again, getting everybody on the same page about it, and the client also acknowledging and respecting the fact that we're not selling you support. We're selling you ongoing product development. We are selling you, innovation and evolution and growing what we worked on. And if
having clear guardrails around what you do and what you're not going to do.
Totally.
So tell me a story, or give me an example from your current client work that you've done where you've helped a client through this process. You can keep it anonymous,
Sure.
but where, you've gotten some pushback where the team is freaking out or doesn't want to do it, but they're highly fluctuative, dependent on large projects. Like, how did you take them through the process?
Yeah, I think what I have zeroed in on that I'm good at in my sales consulting, I think there's a lot of great sales consultants out there and people that know a hell of a lot more than me as well. But where I'm good, I think, is because I learned what I learned at Happy Cog. I came in at a time where Happy Cog was this pretty singular agency and had this kind of self-esteem and role in the industry. That's what I learned. I didn't know anything else. That's what I thought this was. It's like the whole Bane from Batman thing where he was like, you merely adopted the darkness. I was born there. Like I was born in that kind of energy of having this autonomy and having this kind of control and vision. So what I'm good at is I think helping clients who want to take more control, who are ready to kind of have more of that kind of command and energy in their relationships and start to be more of a, leading their clients, not just taking orders from them, like, calling their shots. And I think truly where I've helped my clients dial up, especially their retainer business, is by throwing out the assumptions of what a retainer should be, which I think is sometimes over-informed by technical support and maintenance, is like the baked in version of a retainer for a lot of technology companies. Like that's what we would do. We would,
right.
We'll do hosting, we'll do this. And instead stealing from the playbook from full service agencies who have account management down to a science. Like full service agencies, their business is built on account management. It's their bread and butter. They want 6-year-long AOR relationships and growth, and they want to take over the whole marketing plan. Like the ambitions of a traditional agency are endless. So they are great at manufacturing healthy and valuable, retainers or accounts that then behave that way. So part of it was stealing some of the playbook from traditional agencies and, quarterly business reviews and annual business reviews and pitching work and strategy and measuring effect and just having more vision for what a retainer could be, as opposed to, I'm just really grateful you're cutting me a check for $5,000 every month. It's like, no, don't do that. Go to them and explain to them the value they'd get out of a 10K retainer, a 15K retainer. One of my clients just sold a 30K a month retainer for a 17-person team. Like,
wow.
It wasn't, and they were appropriately, wonderfully grateful that I helped them out with that, because it's huge for them to have that kind of revenue. It's as locked in as it is. Every retainer for the most part will have some kind of out. There's always some, but it's not engraved in stone, but they have a contract that says, barring some kind of unforeseen circumstance, they're in a year-long retainer next year for $360,000. That's not bad.
Yeah.
And, they're going to engineer that retainer to be a vessel through which interesting projects flow through. They're going to write, what's in the backlog. They're going to pitch ideas that the client hadn't come up with on their own. That's my biggest regret in my time when I was doing this at Happy Cog, was I didn't see the possibility of the retainer being a great avenue to sell work you're excited about to the client. You have all their attention. You understand their brand and their experience and their goals so well. There's always some things that they need to focus on that they're not seeing. It's almost a crime not to surface those and suggest those to the client and give them a chance to say, oh, that sounds like a great idea. We should do that. I mean, the simplest version was when we were working with David's, they had identified that, like, listen, even if every bride in the US buys a wedding gown from us, there's only so many weddings that happen every year. Like, we just decided we can't grow beyond the total number of weddings in the United States. And we can't have a business with that kind of cap on it. So we want to become a company that sells quinceañera dresses and prom dresses and mother of the bride dresses. If we want to be every major milestone in a woman's life, we wanted her to come to us to find the right gown or whatever for that. And what we should have done, what we should have gone back to them, I should have pulled our designer aside and our project manager and said, design a homepage for a prom site. Just mock it up. Like, we know their brand, we know their business, we built their e-commerce site, we understand their UX, like all of this. Like, give me 4 hours on a design, give me 4 hours on a scope of what it would cost to do it, when it would, a project plan. Let's sketch it all out and hold it up to the client and say, do you want a prom site? Because nobody wants to go to a wedding site to buy a prom dress. And you want to grow your business. This is what it could look like. And the goal wouldn't be, it would be amazing if they looked at that and said, yes, we'll gladly spend, $300,000 in that project. Let's go. The goal, I've learned, is just exhibit that behavior. Doing that alone is valuable enough.
Interesting.
Like, we were thinking about you on our own dime. This is an idea you hadn't thought of yet. This is the way this could look. This is how soon we could get started. This is how thoughtful we are about your business. I think the goal in that interaction is for the client to say, well, I don't think we're going to do that because of this, this, and this. But now that you bring that up, what if we talked about this other thing over? Because that's what always happens. That's what always happens is for whatever reason, clients are wonderful and people are amazing, but we're all flawed machines and we don't calculate things precisely. And had you not poked at the client with that idea, this other project that you were just as suited for before, but they weren't thinking about you for whatever reason, would not have surfaced as a part of that conversation. And that's what your goal is to say to them, do you know we could do this too? If your team is dying to work on an iOS app and you've only been doing websites, pitch an iOS app to the client. If your team wants to, move in another direction, pitch that direction. But at a minimum, again, at least you're exhibiting to the client, like, this idea shows we get you. It shows that you matter to us. Let's talk more about these kinds of things. And why don't you welcome us into a part of the conversation that maybe we only have one hand in or we're not invited to yet, which is like, what are we doing next year? What are our goals? Like, what should we be doing? What should we be worried about? Like, it's a way to fight your way into that conversation. And then, like I said, what I've seen time and time again is you aim for one target and you wind up hitting another because the energy of that conversation erupts into some other unforeseen opportunity. And now you've, grown your retainer plus a big project, or you've added something massive to your retainer. To me, that's always been the fun part of sales, is making it a creative exercise. And, it's not speculative. You understand their business. They're paying you as part of a retainer. This is paid, informed work. It's not spec work. It is like sound reasoning, and it's an interesting conversation to have. And people will,
in a sense, it's like you're getting paid to pitch the client more ideas. In a sense,
100%.
Yeah. But I love that you said that even if you don't succeed, or even if they do something smaller or different, it's still a success, and they still appreciate that you're coming to them, delivering value, giving them creative ideas. That's great.
That's the biggest part of my consulting too, is focusing on process, not results. You've got to be process oriented. You can't be results oriented. It's too uncertain. Selling nuanced, bespoke, complicated client projects it's not selling thousands of things. It's selling maybe dozens of things. There's not enough like reps at this where you can look at like a quantum kind of quantitative approach to crushing this. It's too nuanced. So if you get hung up on results, you're listening to the noise, not the signal. You have to focus on process. And the process that feels responsible in this case is surface these ideas at respectful intervals, the right way, exhibiting the right behavior. The hope is that this will net out something. The goal is to execute that process, though, over and over again, in the hopes that you create the opportunity for a positive result.
I love that. Yeah, that's great. I want to pivot from that to talking about your latest project. So you and another guest on this podcast, Brett Harned, have been kind of experimenting with a new business model, working doing direct client services work. I kind of joked with you beforehand that you advise agencies, and this is kind of the non-agency model. Don't call it an agency model. So what is this? And tell a little bit about what the experiment looks like.
So this is all inspired by another colleague of ours who we had the joy to work with at Happy Cog, named Anthony Colangelo, who is an iOS engineer who's also like a semi-famous podcaster. His Main Engine Cutoff podcast is like tens of thousands of subscribers about commercial aviation. He's brilliant. And he's been working in iOS since he left Happy Cog. He left Happy Cog around 5 years ago, and he's been working in iOS since. He's recently left his full-time position to go out and do client services work. And we've had lunch together every Wednesday forever. We've just always been friends and stayed in touch, even when we didn't work together. And in our conversations, my fear was he can only sell so many, hours of his own before he's tapped out. Like, the only way to make more money is to charge more or to work more hours. How can you work smarter, not harder, make money when the lights are off, like expand your business? And he has no desire to run an agency, to grow a team, to be responsible for those things. Like that's the tension. Is like the way that you get there is you build a team, and then you have like a more robust capability, and you can kind of tackle things that you might not be able to tackle solo. So there's this gap between where he's at and what he could do. And the metaphor that kind of came out of all this, which is a clumsy metaphor, and I'm still working on it, was, in a way, Anthony's a food truck. So it's the food truck and commercial kitchen metaphor. And what we saw, this kind of came up in conversations with Brett. He was talking about having ordered pizza during the quarantine, during the pandemic. And when the pizza arrived, it was in a Chuck E. Cheese box. And he asked the Grubhub delivery, like, did you pick this up at Chuck E. Cheese? And here, this Chuck E. Cheese had like created a delivery sub-brand for like Italian food and was selling pizzas not as Chuck E. Cheese, but using the Chuck E. Cheese kitchen. And there were the kitchens, rather. And there would be these commercial kitchens that had been spun up that had a huge commercial kitchen. And they had like an Italian desk, a Chinese food desk, a Mexican food desk. And out of this commercial kitchen, they spun up just delivery services where, we'll all cook in this one kind of hub and we'll sell this food during, and
and this is in a Chuck E. Cheese kitchen?
Well, the Chuck E. Cheese was the pizza, but there's other instances of this where it's more of a robust commercial kitchen that's not the Chuck E. Cheese model.
Got it. Okay.
But it is essentially like we are a back office of a kitchen, and we have 7 different sub brands now that farm out of this kitchen into delivery services, and it just allows these proprietors to stay in business when their businesses were closed. So thinking about that and thinking about Anthony and thinking about his goals, it sounded a lot to me like in this world of this food truck analogy, Anthony's a food truck. A food truck can only sell food on location, where they're at, the hours they're open. They're limited by the wonderfulness that is their food truckiness, right? That's their limitation. But if you can back the food truck up into a commercial kitchen, you can retain the specialness of that food truck, and the food truck can still do its thing, but it opens up scale at a commercial level that the food truck by itself doesn't have the interest or desire or capability to do. And in our world, if Anthony is a singular practitioner, I mean, this is a guy who was the lead iOS app at Dark Sky for 2 years. And when I say lead, only iOS app at Dark Sky for 2 years before they got bought by Apple while having a full-time job. He's profound in his capability. So if he's a singular kind of offering, if he can back his food truck up into the blocking and tackling that an agency needs, which in a lot of ways is sales and project management. Brett and me, Brett is an expert in project management, is consulted on it, is the name brand. He's more synonymous with project management than I'll ever be with sales. But I focus on business development. He focuses on project management. If we can together augment Anthony's capabilities and sell more for him or help him sell more, and if we land a project, someone like Brett, who is an amazingly competent PM, is now going to PM that project, and Anthony doesn't have to. He just gets to be the lead iOS engineer he wants to be, but now he can work with a big team of designers and other developers because Brett's going to PM that and keep the business moving forward. So if I go out there and I fish and I bring in leads, or I help maximize Anthony's potential on that front and manufacture more opportunities, Brett's there in the commercial kitchen to deliver on those responsibilities. So you get, again, sales and delivery, but it's an opportunity to scale what Anthony's doing on a project by project basis. Like, let's hire the consultants we need for this thing. Let's assemble this team, have a grown-up like Brett run the hell out of it. It'll be the best run project that Anthony and I have encountered in the last 5 years. And it allows him to scale his business to more than just individual hours he'll contribute to his own business. Now he can have a project where he's flying solo. He can have another project where he's just working as like the iOS developer member of a team. He can take another lead in and give it to another iOS developer that he's worked with and build it around them because he's the lead source, but they'll crush it. Like, just gives a flexible model to this, but has like, what I guess our hypothesis is that the project management and sales part of this can't just be spun up out of nowhere and then shut off out of nowhere. And then
no,
spun
certainly
up.
those are
right.
highly skilled areas that are easy to
so
screw
there's a
up.
persistence you need there.
Yeah.
Right. So if this works, then other food trucks in theory can back up to our commercial kitchen, and we can do the same thing for Ryan Ireland, who's a Happy Cog alumni, who is synonymous in the craft CMS world and is doing consulting work. And can we build products around Ryan that let him be a technical lead and not have to run an agency because he doesn't want to? He has no desire to do that, but it is the most elegant way to kind of magnify your impact.
Yeah. Or as we're, embracing this digital world more and more, people have networks and connections, and people become more influential in different communities. And, they have those connections. Maybe they have leads coming in, but they just don't have a way of fulfilling it. So,
And
that's an interesting model.
That's one of Anthony and Ryan, and their superpower, especially in Anthony's cases. He's been to every iOS conference under the sun. He has made a commitment to growing and building his network of other folks who do this work, other iOS. He's got that kind of Rolodex. And my life prior to getting into business development, I was a recruiter for 6 years. I helped create a professional community in Philadelphia called Philamade that was a pretty interesting organization in Philadelphia for 3 or 4 years, where we were just convening creative. So I've always been a community builder. I've always been a people collector. I've always been like a connector of some kind. So finding the people for us so far, and again, we're trying this. This is an experiment. We're seeing how viable this is. But the last thing I'm worried about is being able to find people. My biggest concern is that I'm a white guy, Brett's a white guy, Anthony's a white guy. I don't want to do this if it's just going to be propagating opportunity for people who don't struggle to find opportunities. For this to work, this has to be an avenue for other folks from other backgrounds to build more diverse and interesting teams, because to me, that's just like a moral obligation. That's something I learned early on. I think it was, I doubled down on that when I was working with Super Friendly for the past couple of years. Dan Mall's, singularly committed to that as well. That's just a core part of this. So if in this, we can create a foothold for other folks to climb on board, to me, that's when this would be successful. If this is just, me hamster wheeling leads for Anthony and we're just, lining each other's pockets, I think that's a pretty meager version of what this could be, but I hope we can scale it. Yeah.
Well, I know we're almost out of time. I want to wrap up. There are some fascinating companies out there that help with that. Odetta.ai is one. I know also just interviewed Sarah Hawley from Growmotely that are helping, women to work remote jobs. So I can connect you with those resources afterwards.
Wonderful.
But, but I want to wrap things up with the question I was asked, which is, I'm a big fan of gratitude. And if you look around at your peers and contemporaries, others in the industry, however you want to define that, who do you respect? Who do you admire? You mentioned Brett, you mentioned Anthony, you mentioned a number of different names here. Who would you acknowledge?
I think the person that leaps to mind immediately is Nancy Lyons at Clockwork.
Also another past guest. She's great. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Then lucky you. Just somebody who is one of the most authentic people you'll ever meet in your entire life. One of the bravest people you'll probably meet in your entire life. She's funny as hell. It doesn't hurt that she's hilarious. She's somebody that if you work for Nancy, I can imagine the people that work for her would walk through fire. She just has to inspire that from all the people around her. I hope she runs for office. That's my sincere hope, is that, she's running for some kind of elected position that I can vote in at some point. I've always been I was shocked by her at first and how amazing she is on minute one, and just getting to know her a little bit over the years through the bureau, through owner camps and things like that. She always is who she is, and the character she brings to things is kind of amazing to behold. So I always think of her when, what kind of decision am I going to make? I try to use her as a little bit of a North Star for that. I enjoy when I get to check in with her from time to time, but I think she's really amazing.
Yeah, clockwork.com is the name of her agency, and she has an awesome book, Work Like a Boss. A kick in the pants guide to finding and using your power at work. I love that. Great title.
Yeah. And that's her in a title.
Yeah. Joe, where can people go to connect with you and learn more about you?
Sure. I'm on Twitter at Joe Rinaldi. My website is thatwasclutch.com for my business consulting. On Insta, you can go to joerinaldi.art and you can see some of the illustrations I do from time to time. I'm working on a Star Wars print right now. They're going to turn to a poster. So that's a little side channel thing. So that's where you can find me.
Cool. All right, Joe. Thanks so much.
Thanks, John.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast with John Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution. Revolution. And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution podcast.